Hello, everyone. Good night. For your hope in me and to help me create better stories, tell me in the comments where and when you listen to my stories. And get ready to start the story by liking and subscribing. Chapter 1. The Merchant's Daughter. Take a deep, slow breath. Allow your body to settle into comfort. Let the weight of the day drift away like autumn leaves on a gentle stream. In the time of the Emperor Trajan, when Rome stretched from the misty shores of Britannia to the sun-warmed sands of Egypt, there lived a young woman named Livia. Her small apartment occupied the third floor of an insula, one of those tall residential buildings that lined the streets of ancient Rome like honeycomb cells in a hive. Each evening, as the golden light slanted through her narrow window, Livia would sit before her polished bronze mirror, running a comb made of bone through her dark brown hair. Breathe slowly. Feel yourself relaxing. Livia's father was a merchant of modest success, trading in olive oil and garum, that fermented fish sauce the Romans loved so dearly. He had worked hard to provide his daughter with a small dowry, enough perhaps to attract a respectable husband. A clerk, maybe, or a freedman who had saved enough to start his own workshop. But Livia, like many young Romans, had seen the grand ladies carried through the streets in their litters, and she had noticed something golden. Let your shoulders drop. Release any tension in your jaw. The wealthiest women of Rome, the wives of senators and equestrians, often appeared with hair of brilliant gold. Not the gold of coins exactly, but the softer gold of wheat fields in summer sunlight. Golden, blonde, shimmering. These elaborate hairstyles rose in curls and waves, held in place with ivory pins and ribbons. The effect was striking against their Mediterranean complexions, exotic and rare as peacock feathers. Your breathing is becoming slower now, deeper, more peaceful. Livia had learned from her friend Claudia, who worked as a servant in a wealthy household, that these golden tresses were not always natural. Oh no, the great ladies of Rome had discovered ways to transform their dark hair into spun gold. Some used wigs called capilli, made from the hair of conquered peoples. Particularly prized were the locks of Germanic and Gallic women, those tall, fair-haired barbarians from the forests beyond the Rhine. Feel the story carrying you gently forward, like a leaf on a calm river. One warm evening, as cicadas sang their drowsy song in the gardens below, Livia made a decision. She would try the recipes she had heard whispered about in the markets. The Syrian perfume seller had mentioned a mixture. Saffron, she had said, mixed with the petals of yellow roses and a paste made from wood ash. Applied carefully over many weeks, it could lighten even the darkest hair. Let your eyelids grow heavy. There is no need to fight it. Livia began her transformation slowly. Each morning before the sun rose fully, she would mix her preparation in a small clay bowl. The scent was earthy and slightly sweet. She would apply it carefully, then wrap her hair in clean linen and go about her day. Gradually, Imperceptibly, like dawn brightening the sky, subtle highlights began to appear. Threads of honey, whispers of amber, small gleams of gold. Breathe in peace, breathe out worry. The Romans lived in a vast empire of astonishing diversity. In the bustling streets of Rome itself, you might see Egyptian priests in white linen, Syrian merchants in colorful robes, Greek philosophers in simple cloaks, and soldiers back from Britannia with stories of rain and fog. Beauty, in such a world, took many forms, but there was something about blonde hair, rare among native Italians, that captured the Roman imagination. Your body is becoming heavier, sinking deeper into comfort. The poet Ovid, who lived during the reign of Augustus, had written extensively about beauty and love. In his playful guide to romance, the Ars Amatoria, he mentioned blonde hair as particularly attractive. He wrote of using dyes and botanical treatments to achieve golden locks. The Romans, practical even in vanity, had developed quite sophisticated cosmetic techniques. They were not content merely to admire exotic beauty. They sought to recreate it. Let the gentle rhythm of the words soothe you. Livia's transformation did not go unnoticed. Her neighbor, old Petronia, who sold bread from a stall on the ground floor, commented on how well Livia looked. Like a statue of Venus, she said, though Petronia said such things to everyone. But then Marcus, the clerk from the tax office, who often walked the same route to the forum, began to linger when they encountered each other in the narrow street. Everything is peaceful. Everything is calm. Marcus had steady employment and respectable prospects. His family were freedmen, once slaves who had earned or purchased their liberty, and now made their way in the complex social world of Rome. He had noticed Livia before, certainly. One noticed all the young women in the neighborhood. But something had changed. She seemed to glow, he thought, to shine with possibility. Feel yourself drifting, floating gently. The question of beauty in ancient Rome was tied to so many things: power, status, identity, the empire itself. When Roman legions conquered new territories, they brought back not just gold and slaves, but new ideas about the world. Germanic tribes had fascinated the Romans for centuries. The historian Tacitus wrote about them with a mixture of admiration and unease. These tall, fierce people, with their light hair and pale skin, seemed both barbaric and noble, exotic and pure. Your mind is quietened. Thoughts are slowing. There was something paradoxical in Roman attitudes. The same blonde Germanic women whose hair was prized for wigs were from peoples the Romans considered inferior, barbarians, uncivilized. Yet their physical features, particularly their golden hair, were considered beautiful. Beautiful enough to imitate. Beautiful enough to desire. This contradiction lived at the heart of Roman culture. Masters of the world who constantly absorbed and adapted from those they conquered, deeper and deeper into rest. Livia continued her treatments throughout that summer. By the time autumn arrived, bringing cooler air and the scent of roasting chestnuts from street vendors, her hair had lightened considerably. not dramatically blonde, but kissed with gold, highlighted in a way that suggested sunshine and foreign shores. She felt, if she was honest with herself, more confident, more visible, as if she had stepped partially into that elevated world of the grand ladies in their litters. Everything is soft. Everything is gentle. Marcus finally spoke to her father. The conversation was formal, awkward in the way of such things, but sincere. He could offer security, a decent home. Perhaps Livia was not the richest prize in Rome, but she was respectable, lovely in an interesting way, and seemed kind. These were not small things. Livia's father, relieved and pleased, gave his blessing. Feel the story wrapping around you like a warm blanket. On the evening before her betrothal was to be formally announced, Livia sat once more before her bronze mirror. The face that looked back at her was familiar, but transformed. Her hair caught the lamplight, gleaming with those carefully cultivated golden tones. She thought about beauty and what it meant, about the Germanic women who perhaps had not chosen to give their hair, about the elaborate social dance of Roman life, where appearance and reality intertwined like olive branches in a victory wreath. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful. She thought, too, about the goddess Venus. The Romans had statues of her everywhere. Venus Genetrix, the mother of the Roman people through Aeneas. Venus Victrix, bringer of victory. In these statues, Venus was often depicted with wavy hair that suggested both Hellenic grace and something more exotic, something that transcended any single people or place. Beauty as an ideal, beauty as aspiration. Let yourself sink deeper into this peaceful state. Tomorrow, her new life would begin, but tonight, in this quiet moment between past and future, Livia simply existed, a young Roman woman with golden highlights in her dark hair, a small thread of gold woven into the vast, complex tapestry of empire. She smiled at her reflection, blew out the lamp, and settled into her narrow bed. Outside, the city hummed with life even in darkness. Somewhere, someone was always coming home. Somewhere, someone was always dreaming of transformation. Sleep now. Rest. Let the story carry you gently into dreams. Chapter 2. The Poet's Observation. Breathe deeply and slowly. Feel your entire body relaxing. Marcus Gaius Silvanus was not a great poet. He knew this about himself with the resigned clarity of a man who had once harbored larger ambitions. At 42, he made his living composing commissioned verses for weddings, funerals, and the occasional dedication of a new building. Adequate verses, serviceable. Nothing that would survive the centuries, but enough to pay for a modest apartment and the occasional luxury of good wine. Let each breath carry away tension, in with peace, out with worry. On this particular morning in the reign of Hadrian, Silvanus sat in his favorite spot in the Porticus Octaviae, the covered walkway built by Augustus in honor of his sister. The marble columns rose gracefully around him, and between them, he could watch the flow of Roman life. Watching people was Silvanus's primary occupation beyond the actual writing. How else could one compose verses about human experience without observing humans experiencing things? Your eyelids are growing heavier with each word. Today, he watched the women particularly, not with any improper intent, but with professional interest. He had a commission for a wedding poem, and he needed to refresh his vocabulary of feminine beauty. The challenge, he had found, was to praise the bride without repeating the same tired phrases every other poet used. Like roses was passable, but common. Like dawn had been done to death. He needed something specific, something observed. Feel yourself sinking deeper into the cushions, the mattress, the soft space beneath you. 3 women passed, clearly of the patrician class, their expensive silk stolas rustling softly. Each was accompanied by servants and wore their hair in the elaborate style fashionable among the wealthy. Tall curls, intricate braids. And something Sylvanus had noticed increasingly in recent years. Many were blonde, golden, some shade between honey and amber. One was so light, she appeared almost silvered in the bright morning sun. Your mind is beginning to drift pleasantly. Sylvanus knew enough about such matters to understand these shades were not always natural. His own late wife, Julia, had experimented with lightning preparations before she passed. The bathroom had smelled of strange herbs and ash for months. He had never entirely understood the motivation, but then he had never been required to compete in the complex social hierarchies that governed women's lives in Rome. Everything is becoming softer, more distant, more dreamlike. The fascination with blonde hair was, Sylvanus reflected, a relatively recent phenomenon in the long sweep of Roman history. In the days of the Republic, Roman matrons had prided themselves on darker tresses. Dark hair suggested Romanness, native Italian virtue, the kind of stolid respectability that had built Rome's power. But empire changed everything. Empire meant exposure to the whole world, and the world, it turned out, contained many shades of beauty. Let the rhythm of the story carry you gently forward. Sylvanus remembered a dinner party he had attended years ago in the home of a wealthy merchant who traded in luxury goods across the empire. The conversation had turned, as such conversations often did, to matters of fashion and culture. One guest, a dealer in wigs and hairpieces, had explained the business with surprising frankness. Breathe slowly. In, out. In, out. The finest blonde hair, the wig dealer had said, gesturing with his wine cup, comes from the Germanic territories, from the women of the tribes beyond the Rhine and Danube. These people naturally possess hair of remarkable lightness and texture. When we acquire such hair, usually as part of tribute or through trade, it commands extraordinary prices in Rome. Feel yourself floating on the words like clouds drifting across a peaceful sky. Another guest had asked the obvious question. Why? Why did Roman women, secure in their Mediterranean beauty, desire to imitate the appearance of barbarian women? The wig dealer had smiled knowingly. Rarity, he said. Novelty. And perhaps something deeper. When you wear the golden hair of a Germanic woman, you wear the exotic. You wear the conquered. You demonstrate that even the most distant corners of empire contribute to your beauty. Your body is so heavy now, so completely relaxed. Sylvanus had found this explanation both illuminating and troubling. It suggested that fashion was never merely personal preference. It was always entangled with power, with politics, with Rome's complex relationship to the vast territories it controlled. A blonde wig was not just an accessory, it was a statement about empire itself. Let your thoughts become quiet, scattered, fading. Another group passed now. Middle-class women, perhaps wives of successful tradesmen or minor officials. Their clothing was less opulent, but Sylvanus noticed that two of them also had lighter hair. Perhaps not the silvery blonde of the patrician women, but definitely enhanced, streaked with gold, touched with amber. The fashion had filtered down through the social strata, as fashion always did. Everything is gentle. Everything is calm. Everything is peaceful. Sylvanus made a note on his wax tablet, a metaphor forming in his mind. Hair like the wheat fields of Sicily, touched by the sun. No, too agricultural. Tresses bearing the light of distant northern skies. Better, more exotic. The client would appreciate the reference to foreign lands. It suggested worldliness, sophistication, the cosmopolitan nature of Roman culture. Your breathing is so slow, so deep, so steady. The poet thought about Ovid, who had written so extensively about beauty and transformation. Ovid had lived in a different Rome, under Augustus, when the empire was younger and still consolidating. But already, Ovid had catalogued the various techniques women used to enhance their appearance. Dyes made from plants, mixtures of minerals and oils. Even Ovid had mentioned blonde hair specifically, writing advice to women about how to achieve such shades. Feel the story wrapping around you like silk, like water, like moonlight. What would Ovid make of contemporary Rome? Sylvanus wondered. The empire was larger now, more diverse. Hadrian himself was a Philhellene, a lover of Greek culture who wore a beard in the Greek style. The emperor spent much of his time traveling the provinces, building walls in Britannia, founding cities in the east. Rome was everywhere and nowhere, its identity constantly shifting, absorbing, transforming. Deeper into rest, deeper into peace. A child ran past, laughing, chased by a harried servant. The child's hair was naturally light, the pale blonde that some Roman children possessed before their hair darkened with age. Sylvanus smiled. Natural blonde hair did exist among native Italians, though it was uncommon. Perhaps that natural rarity had initially sparked the fascination. What was rare became precious. What was precious became desirable. Your mind is drifting away from the day, away from concerns. Sylvanus closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the city wash over him. Vendors calling their wares, footsteps echoing off marble, the distant sound of construction, always construction in Rome. The city constantly building, expanding, renewing itself. never static, never finished. Feel yourself sinking into sleep, gently, easily, naturally. When he opened his eyes, another woman was passing, older, perhaps 50, with hair that was clearly a wig, an elaborate blonde creation that sat slightly too perfectly on her head. But who could blame her? In a city that prized youth and beauty, where women's value was so often tied to appearance, what choice did she have but to adapt, to transform, to present the most acceptable version of herself? Everything is becoming dim and distant. Sylvanus made another note. For the wedding poem, he would praise the bride's natural beauty, whatever it was. The poem would suggest that she needed no enhancement, no foreign imports, no elaborate preparations. She was perfect as she was, a true Roman flower. The clients would appreciate the sentiment, even if they didn't believe it. Even if the bride would, like most brides, spend hours being prepared and adorned for her wedding day. Let the words flow over you like warm water. The sun climbed higher, warming the marble around him. Sylvanus felt drowsy. Old poets, he thought, were allowed to doze in public places. It was practically expected. He let his eyes close again. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw blonde hair transformed into golden threads, weaving through the fabric of Roman life, imported from conquered territories, cultivated in small pots and jars, admired, desired, commodified. Sleep is so close now, so very close. Beauty was complicated in empire. It always had been. The Romans prized virtue but loved luxury. They celebrated traditional values while constantly absorbing foreign influences. They conquered the world and then invited the world to change them. Blonde hair was just one small thread in this vast, complicated tapestry. But it was there, golden, gleaming, impossible to ignore. Rest now, sleep now, dream. Chapter 3. The Northern Captive. Allow yourself to settle even deeper into comfort. Your body knows how to rest. The village had been called Bergheim, though that name meant little now. Freyja barely remembered it some days, though she had lived there for the first 16 years of her life. The longhouse where her family had gathered around the fire. The forest beyond, dark with pines and mystery. The small stream where she had washed clothes with her mother and sisters, laughing at private jokes in their Germanic tongue. Breathe slowly, steadily, like the tide coming in and going out. That had been 3 years ago, before the Roman auxiliary troops had swept through the region, putting down what they called an uprising and what Freyja's people had called defending our land. The warriors had fought, the warriors had died, and the survivors, mostly women and children, had been taken south. South across the Rhine, south through Gaul with its Roman cities and paved roads, south to Rome itself. Feel the weight of your body sinking down, down, down. Freyja had been sold twice, first at a market in Lugdunum, a major trading city in Gaul. The dealer had examined her with the appraising eye of someone judging livestock. Young, healthy, tall by Roman standards, and most importantly, her hair. Long, thick, and the color of pale wheat, almost silver in certain light. The dealer had known immediately that she would command a high price in Rome. Let any remaining tension dissolve like salt in water. The second sale had happened in Rome's great slave market. Freya had stood on the platform with a dozen others, feeling the eyes of potential buyers examining every aspect of her appearance. The auctioneer had made much of her hair, running his hands through it to show its length and texture. Genuine Germanic, he had proclaimed, the finest quality, suitable for service in a noble household or for other purposes. Your thoughts are becoming vague, indistinct, like mist. The other purposes were clear enough. Freya had learned by then that wealthy Roman women paid extraordinary sums for hair like hers. Some captive Germanic women were purchased specifically to be kept as hair farmers, their long locks regularly cut and fashioned into wigs. Others, luckier or perhaps unluckier depending on one's perspective, were kept as servants, their exotic appearance a sign of their owner's wealth and access. Everything is peaceful. Everything is slow. Everything is soft. Freya had been purchased by Domitia Lucilla, a wealthy widow whose late husband had been a senator. Domitia had 3 other Germanic slaves, all women, all blonde. They lived in a special section of her large domus, a house in one of Rome's better districts. Their primary duty was to care for Domitia's extensive collection of wigs and hairpieces, but they also served in other capacities: dressing, bathing, attending to the elaborate rituals of aristocratic Roman life. Feel yourself drifting on calm water beneath a starry sky. In the evenings, when their duties were finished, the Germanic women would gather in their small shared room. They spoke in their native language, clinging to it like a lifeline to their former selves. Gisela was from a different tribe, but spoke a similar dialect. Brunhild had been a chief's daughter, though that meant nothing now. Helga was the eldest, perhaps 30, and remembered the most about the old ways. Your breathing is so quiet now, so gentle. They talked about hair, inevitably. It was impossible not to, given its central role in their current lives. Helga explained what she had learned from the wig maker who visited the household. The Roman ladies believe our hair has special properties, she said one night. Not just the color, but the texture. They think it holds curl better. They think it catches light in a way their own hair doesn't. Let the story carry you deeper into rest. Freya found this oddly funny, in a bitter way. In her village, her pale hair had been common, unremarkable, pretty enough, but nothing special. Everyone had light hair. Her sisters had been even fairer. Now in Rome, that same hair was exotic, valuable, something to be harvested and sold. The very thing that marked her as different, as conquered, as other, was precisely what made her valuable. Sleep is pulling at you gently, insistently, peacefully. Domitia herself was not cruel by the standards of Roman masters. She did not beat her slaves unnecessarily. She provided adequate food and shelter. She even showed occasional kindness, particularly when in good moods. But she was a Roman aristocrat, and to her, the Germanic women were property. Beautiful property, perhaps, but property nonetheless. Your body is so heavy, so completely relaxed. Once Freya had been present when Domitia entertained friends, and the conversation had turned to fashion. "The Germanic look is so striking," one woman had said. "There's something pure about it, something unspoiled by civilization." The irony was apparently lost on them. These were women of the empire that had conquered Freya's people, destroyed her village, enslaved her family, yet they romanticized the very people they had subjugated. "Everything is becoming darker, quieter, more distant." Another guest had disagreed. "I find the excessive lightness somewhat ghostly," she said. "It lacks warmth. I prefer enhancement of our natural Roman coloring, rather than complete transformation." This had sparked a lengthy debate about degrees of blonde. Golden was generally acceptable. Honeytones were sophisticated. But the very pale, silvery blonde, like Freya's, was more controversial. Too extreme for some tastes. Not Roman enough. Feel yourself floating away on these words. Freya had learned to absent herself mentally during such conversations. Your mind is so quiet now, so peaceful, so still. Sometimes, lying in her narrow bed at night, Freya would try to remember her mother's face. The memory was fading, like a drawing slowly erased. She remembered her mother's hands better than her face. Strong hands that had spun wool, baked bread, braided Freya's hair each morning. Those hands had touched Freya's head in blessing the last time she saw her, before the Romans separated them at the first market. Deeper and deeper into sleep. She wondered sometimes what her mother would think if she could see Freya now, living in a grand Roman house, well-fed, not worked to exhaustion. But she also lived in a gilded cage, valued primarily for the hair that grew from her head, hair that would eventually be cut and fashioned into adornment for women who would never know or care about the girl from whose head it came. Let go. Let go of everything. Let go and float in darkness. Helga had told them all a story once, late at night, when homesickness pressed particularly hard. In their old religion, before the Romans came, there were tales of golden treasures guarded by dragons, gold that brought both blessing and curse. "We were the treasure," Helga had said quietly. "They came seeking gold, and they found it. In us, in our hair. We were the dragon's hoard they carried away." Sleep, sleep, sleep. Freya found strange comfort in this interpretation. It gave meaning to meaninglessness. It transformed them from mere victims into something mythological. Treasures, valuable enough to guard jealously, powerful enough to desire. Your consciousness is fading like candlelight at dawn. Outside their window, night settled over Rome. The great city never truly slept, but it quieted. In the distance, she could sometimes hear singing from taverns, or the tramp of the night watch making their rounds. Rome, she had come to understand, was a city built on contradictions. It conquered the world in the name of civilization, then borrowed that civilization from those it conquered. It enslaved people, then coveted their beauty. It was endlessly hungry for novelty while claiming to value tradition. Rest completely. Rest utterly. Rest now. Freya's hair, would be cut in the morning. It had grown long enough. Demisha needed a new wig for some important social occasion. Freya didn't mind terribly. Hair grew back. She would be shorn like a sheep, her long silver blonde locks carefully gathered and taken away to be transformed into someone else's beauty. In a few months, it would grow again, and the cycle would repeat. Everything is darkness and peace. But tonight, for these last hours before the shears came, her hair was still hers. She touched it gently, running her fingers through its length. In some ways, she thought, we all wear masks in Rome. The grand ladies wear wigs to be beautiful. She wore the mask of the obedient slave. The Romans themselves wore the mask of invincibility, everyone pretending to be something they perhaps were not. Sleep deeply, dream peacefully, rest. Chapter 4, The Philosopher's Reflection. Breathe, just breathe. Everything else can wait. Lucius Aurelius Cato was 93 years old, an age so improbable in ancient Rome that he himself sometimes wondered if he had been forgotten by the gods. He sat in his small garden, wrapped in a thick wool cloak despite the relative warmth of the spring day. Old bones were always cold. Let your body become completely still and comfortable. He had outlived the emperors of his youth, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius. Now Marcus Aurelius ruled, that philosopher-emperor who wrote meditations on stoic virtue between military campaigns. Cato approved of Marcus Aurelius, though he had long since given up the idea that any emperor, however philosophical, could truly solve the deep paradoxes at the heart of Rome. Your breathing is becoming slower, deeper, more rhythmic. Cato had spent his life thinking about such paradoxes. Not professionally, he had never been important enough for that, but privately, in his own mind, feel yourself sinking into perfect relaxation. Today, his mind wandered to a question that had puzzled him for years. What did Rome actually want to be? Not what it claimed to be, but what it truly desired in its heart. And nowhere was this question more interestingly complicated than in matters of beauty and fashion. Your eyelids are so heavy now. The blonde hair phenomenon, for instance, Cato had watched it develop over his long lifetime. In his youth, it had been relatively rare. A few exotic wigs worn by the most adventurous aristocratic women. By his middle years, it had become more common, a fashion that signified sophistication and access. Now, in his old age, it seemed almost ubiquitous among women of means. The streets of Rome glittered with golden heads. Let each word gently guide you deeper into rest. What did this transformation mean? Cato thought it revealed something fundamental about empire itself. Rome had conquered the Mediterranean world and beyond, but in conquering, it had been conquered in turn. Not militarily, of course. Rome's legions remained supreme. But culturally, aesthetically, Rome had absorbed so much from so many places that its original identity had become diffuse. Everything is becoming dreamlike and distant. Were the Romans still truly Roman? When they dressed in silk from China, worshipped gods from Egypt, studied philosophy from Greece, ate spices from India, and wore hair from Germania, what did Roman even mean anymore? The city had become a mirror reflecting the entire known world. Your thoughts are scattering like leaves on a gentle breeze. Cato remembered a conversation from decades ago with a Greek philosopher who had visited Rome. They had sat in a garden much like this one, drinking watered wine and discussing identity. The Greek had argued that Rome's genius was absorption. You don't destroy what you conquer, he had said. You digest it. You make it Roman by incorporating it. Breathe in peace. Breathe out everything else. But was that true? Or did absorption work both ways? When Roman women wore Germanic hair, were they making Germania Roman? Or were they becoming a little Germanic themselves? When wealthy Romans built Greek-style villas and spoke Greek at dinner parties and educated their children with Greek tutors, were they civilizing Greece? Or was Greece civilizing them? Feel the darkness gathering around you, soft and welcoming. The blonde hair was just a symptom of something larger, a visible marker of Rome's complex relationship with otherness. The empire needed the other, needed to conquer it, to define itself against it, but also needed to possess it, to absorb it, to be transformed by it. The blonde barbarian was simultaneously inferior and desirable, conquered and envied. Your mind is growing quiet and still. Cato thought about his own long life. He had been young during Trajan's campaigns in Dacia, that distant land of mountains and gold mines. The triumph after that victory had included hundreds of Dacian captives paraded through Rome's streets. He remembered the crowd's reaction. Mockery and fascination intermingled. These tall foreigners, with their strange clothing and light-colored hair, were clearly inferior to Romans, yet people stared at them with intense curiosity. The exotic always fascinated. Sleep is so near now. Just let go. Years later, he had seen Dacian gold worked into jewelry worn by Roman matrons. He had seen slaves of Dacian origin working in Roman households. The conquered had been literally incorporated into the body of Rome, absorbed, digested, transformed into something Roman, yet also transforming Rome in the process. Everything is soft, warm, peaceful, safe. There was a rose bush in Cato's small garden, planted by his late wife 40 years ago. She had loved roses. Every spring it bloomed reliably, pink flowers with a sweet scent. His wife had not colored her hair. She had thought the fashion frivolous, though she had never judged other women for their choices. Everyone decorates themselves as they see fit, she used to say. The gods gave us bodies, but we make them beautiful. Your breathing is so slow now, so deep, so calm. Beautiful. That word again. What did it mean? Every culture thought different things beautiful. The Romans of the old republic would have found contemporary fashions bizarre. The Germanic tribes probably thought Roman clothing ridiculous. Beauty was not universal or eternal. It was negotiated, culturally specific, constantly changing. Feel yourself floating in darkness, peaceful and free. Yet there were constants too. Humans everywhere seemed to value rarity in beauty. What was common became invisible. What was rare became precious. In Rome, blonde hair was rare, therefore valued. But if everyone became blonde, would it lose its appeal? Probably. Fashion moved like water, always seeking the new, the different, the distinctive. Let the last threads of consciousness gently slip away. Cato felt his eyes closing. He was tired so often these days. The afternoon sun warmed his old face. Around him, the garden hummed with early spring life. Bees investigating the roses, birds calling from the fig tree. The distant sounds of the city, that eternal Rome that had contained his entire long life. Deeper and deeper into sleep, he thought about blonde hair one last time. And then the thought dissolved into something softer, into images without words, golden threads, northern forests, the infinite complexity of empire, the simple human desire to be beautiful, to be noticed, to transform oneself into something special. Everything is darkness now, peaceful darkness. Rome would continue after he was gone. The empire would persist or it wouldn't. Fashion would change. Blonde hair might go out of style or become even more popular. It didn't matter. What mattered was that humans everywhere, in every time, sought meaning and beauty. They transformed themselves and their world. They created and destroyed. They conquered and were conquered. Sleep, sleep, sleep deeply. In his dream, Cato was young again, walking through a Rome that was and wasn't Rome. The people had hair of every color imaginable, gold and black and brown and red. They spoke every language. They worshipped every god. They were everyone and no one. And it was beautiful, chaotic, impossible, and beautiful. Rest now. Rest completely. Rest forever in this peaceful moment. The sun set. The garden grew dark. An old man slept in his chair, dreaming of empire. Somewhere in Rome, a woman brushed golden hair that may or may not have been her own. Somewhere, a Germanic girl braided her silver blonde locks before sleep. Somewhere, a merchant sold wigs to wealthy customers who wanted to capture something exotic, something other, something beautiful. Sleep, dream, peace. Sleep with the ancients. Sleep with everyone who has ever closed their eyes and surrendered to darkness. And you sleep too. You sleep deeply. You sleep peacefully. You sleep completely. There is no past and no future. Only this moment of perfect rest. Only this darkness. Only this peace. Sleep now. Sleep. The end.